I'm Miggy from Figma as a former educator and now designer advocate for education at Figma. We put this panel together to get insights from folks in the education and design space to discuss how design process builds critical skills in students and how those skills empower them for a variety of meaningful careers in the future. So let's get started with some intros. I'm going to begin with Alicia. Tell us a little bit about yourself and, your name, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. My name is Alicia Kwan, and I'm a former middle school science teacher, taught science and digital media for 5 years and love that time. I'm also currently now a product designer at Imagine Learning, which is an edtech company focused on the K through 12 space. And I had my wow aha moment as I moved into product design full time and used Figma. I wish I had used this more in the classroom. And right when I was in between the two, one of the last things I did in the classroom was just host a virtual workshop on UX for middle school students, because I wanted the students to be exposed to some of that and to learn some of that, knowing that that would just enhance other things that they're doing in their lives. And so one more thing too is that I'm the one of the community advocates for our Friends of Figma educators group. So just definitely encourage you all to join us. We'll be doing more educator events throughout the rest of the year. So really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And awesome. Appreciate what you do for the Friends of Figma educator community. Okay, next up, Shay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shay. I'm right now a staff product designer at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative on the education team, designing the digital experience of being in the classroom with my amazing colleagues there. Before, I have taught first grade to the children of the refugee in Iran. And I have also been part of a class in a project that is called the Flying Classroom, where we went to faraway villages and co-designed schools with students there. So those are my relations to education in general.
Amazing. Love the background. I love everything that you've done. I've been such a pleasure to get to know you, Shay. All right, next up we have Noah.
Hey everyone, my name is Noah Levin. I'm currently the design director at Figma, leading our product design and writing teams here. Before that, I led design teams at ClassPass and at Google and taught designers how to code at Framer. I studied human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon, and I'm originally from Pittsburgh, and it's good to be here.
Awesome. Thanks. It's so glad to have you on this panel. All right, cool. So let's head right into those questions. So I have them right here. The first question I'm going to ask is, what is your relationship to design? What role do you think it plays in education? So thinking about soft skills, hard skills that students can learn early on. And I'm going to start with Alicia. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to zoom in on what role do you think it plays in education? I think it can and it should be all encompassing. I'm big on how design applies to pretty much any subject area. Like for example, yesterday it was really awesome to see one of the teachers sharing about how she teaches literacy and is thinking through like the design process, but in a literacy class. Maybe some of the educators out there might have heard of this, the 4 C's of 21st century skills. It was something that was kind of coined a while back. And those 4 C's are communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. And it's something that's emphasized, especially in the K-12 space a lot. And to me, it completely maps to the design process. And as a teacher or as a designer, I found myself needing these skills. And when you think about communication and collaboration, you're doing that all the time with your internal team, with others that you're advocating for, with stakeholders. I think Figma actually just published a report recently about collaboration and the importance of that. You've got to explain your reasoning behind a design or a decision sometimes. You're advocating. So it's definitely built in. And then, creativity, a lot of people think of, when they think of design, they think of creativity, but, thinking outside the box and exploring solutions, just that divergent thinking and working with an open-ended question. I'm even thinking of things I'm working through this week where it's definitely needed in practice. And then that fourth one, critical thinking, the ability to just process, analyze, iterate off experiments, problem solve. I mentioned in the jargon of 4Cs just because maybe for some of you out there, you're trying to advocate for using more design processes in your classroom, and maybe you speak their language by saying, hey, this is actually the 4Cs. This is the 4Cs to having those successful career skills. And, similar to how maybe a lot of people in this room have heard of growth mindset. I know that that's popular in the education space as well. I think it would be awesome that not only growth mindset is something that we talk about, but just having a design process mindset where that's something that affects your classroom procedures. It affects your processes. And one final thing that I'll add is just to go beyond like career readiness. And I know we're focused on that today, but not being just work focused, but thinking about how can design help our students grow as people, like holistically, tackling problems with an experimental mindset, even personal ones, just trying to use that to build confidence in students so that they say, hey, I can approach this, with an experimental mindset. I can tackle these problems. And if something doesn't work out, I can try again. I can learn from it. Just that resilience. I think all those things kind of come out of using the design process in education. So those are some of my initial thoughts there.
Cool. So I absolutely love that. Communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking. And then you also have two more C's, like career readiness, confidence. I love that notion, the way that's, we've had a lot of frameworks here, but I think that that's a good one to kind of default on. Shay, I would love to know, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah. So I'm going to start from my experience in design. I started from industrial design when I was 18 years old, long time ago. I think that one of my takeaways from years of being in design is that you need to look at everything from different aspects. There's not just one thing that you can focus on. So like, for example, when we are designing things, whatever that might be, I was an industrial designer back then, so they were actual things that you could touch. But now that I'm in digital design, it becomes more like softer than before. But in all of these problems that we're focusing right now, the thread is we look at everything from different points of view. We look at things from an aesthetic point of view, from function, from psychology, social aspects, or business. There are multiple things, ethics, all of these things come into design when you're looking at problems and designing for them. And one of the things, that the way it connects to education for me, in my years at CZI, one of the bigger takeaways for me was the approach that organization takes to education, and that is the whole child approach. You want to look at children and their needs from a holistic point of view. What are the things that a student need in their lives to become the best version of themselves? And how can that be true for every person? Not just one type of, one group or like a certain background, for example. And like, what are the social emotional needs of a person? What are the academic needs of a person? And multiple, like more are there, but just for the sake of time, I just want to say that the way that these two connect to one another is, I think that teachers are designers in the classroom as well. They are trying to solve a problem, which is educating students to become the better person that they can be in the future.
Thank you for that. I really resonate with like that whole child approach. Like I love that kind of theme. I'm already seeing that from like Alicia as well. The notion of like the teacher as the designer in that space. I think that is like fantastic. Like the reason we brought y'all here is to start to see those threads, having those backgrounds. So and I love the interdisciplinary sort of like nature of that, thinking from industrial design to sort of the softer design. So Noah, I'd be really interested, like as your role in Figma, design director, to hear some of your thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, I think Alicia and Shay touched on so many good aspects and so many important ones with design. And I think I'll just add maybe two more to it, which is one is around empathy in general and how much a part of our job as designers is to understand people who might be different than us or projects that require knowledge that we might not know yet. And so much of that job is about asking questions and listening and doing research. And that's just such an important part of learning anything, I think. And so there's definitely a good relationship with design and education in that thread. The other I would call out is what might be unique to design also is this idea of some visual thinking and visual expression, something where you can really look at a construct or look at something and talk about it in a way that might be easier for people to understand, whether that's a framework or whether that's a diagram. Teachers have been using, of course, visuals for aids for forever, as a way to describe things. And as designers, that's a big part of our jobs too, whether we're describing a process that we're trying to solve or improve, whatever it might be. I think that, visual expression and empathy are just two aspects I would touch on that feel really connected to education here.
Cool. I love that. And I love the way you're bringing it back to kind of like visuals and that space. So as we're thinking about the roles that like educators play, let's also start to think about, that road to success for students, right? So how do teachers set up students for success down the road? 10 years, 20 years, like what's sticking? So thinking about that initial process of design, that relationship between design and education, what are things that they can do to set up students for success? Let's start with Shay.
Yeah, so when we talk about 20, 30 years down the road, I think about careers and the future that you cannot really predict. Like you cannot really know what the jobs are going to be in the future. So we're talking about the traits that a person needs to have in order to be successful in any setting, which is similar to ours. Like with the growth of technology during the past 20 years, no one could guess my job right now. And being able to do this, I had to become this flexible person to learn new things, be curious. Not saying that I am that person, but in order to become a successful person in the future, in the vagueness of what is coming, you need to be a self-actualized, curious person that is flexible to learn new things. And I think that that is one of the things that could happen in schools right now, to emphasize on those traits rather than the subject itself, and how you go to how you're present in the classroom as a person rather than what your score is going to be. And also one other thing that resonates with me from the field of design is the empowerment to have an impact on the world that is uncertain. So that is, I think, something else that teachers can emphasize on in the classroom as well, coming through the design thinking.
Well, I love that. Like empowering students, engaging them, making sure that they have that curiosity. It makes me think of this quote from computer graphics pioneer Muriel Cooper, who says, "I have a disdain for answers." Just kind of leading to more questions. I have a profound disdain for answers is the actual quote, just kind of like leading to more questions. So with that, I'm going to take the question to Alicia. So how do teachers set up students for success down the road?
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Shay said. And, I think of a quote that we chatted about when I was a teacher a lot with my team is there's two choices here. You could try to prepare the road for the child, or the child for the road. Meaning, prepare the road, the world, try to change their circumstances, which there's definitely lots of areas where we need to work to do that. But also when it comes to 20 or 30 years down the road, like Shay said, we don't exactly know what that will look like. But we have our children right in front of us, or your students, whoever it might be right in front of you. And you can work to facilitate building those character traits. And she mentioned curiosity, for example. And I just think of Figma, for those of you out there where maybe it's a brand new tool, it's something that you've never used, or your students have never used. That's awesome. That's a great opportunity to just kind of jump in together and figure it out together. And your students will probably teach you lots of things about how to use it as well. We need to learn new jobs or new tools on the job all the time. you move from one role to another, and now it requires something different, so you have to be flexible. I think that this is a great opportunity to try and do that. And so I think my main thought here is thinking beyond the tool itself, but just how you approach it, and just kind of, once again, having somewhat of a flexible experimental mindset to jump in and try something new, and invite others in the process as well.
Cool. I love that. It's like prepare the road for the child or the child for the road. Makes me think, if I combine that with Shay's, like empower the child to question and redesign the road. So like I love that notion of empowerment and the way that preparation sticks. So let's switch gears a little bit, and let's take a look. So empowering that child and empowering that student. Let's say they want to be a designer, and they want to be in that field where they are able to design these spaces and be included and empowered to design these spaces. So Noah, for someone looking to break into design, what is it that you look for when you're going to hire these individuals? Like, what are those traits, those soft skills, those hard skills that are applicable?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, even on the side here, it talks about soft skills and hard skills, which both show up in a lot of different ways, right? So from the hard skills, you might be looking, if you're a hiring manager at a company and you're trying to find a designer, that you might be looking first at their portfolio, right? How they showcase their work, what that work looks like, what problems they were trying to solve. And that's only half of it, right? The other half is, how can they talk about it? How do they collaborate? What are the soft skills? How do they actually collaborate in practice? And so I think in preparing students and thinking about the kinds of things you want them to learn, you usually need a mix of both. And some ideas might be things like making sure that there are a fair amount of team-oriented projects. If you think about it, almost nothing in the world was created by like a single individual, right? It's always a teamwork effort. It's always multiple people working together to make something. And so hopefully we can reflect that too in the way that students are working. And that way also they can balance each other's skills and learn from each other and figure out the right ways to make things. And so I think, that hopefully helps with some of the soft skills side of things. They can also learn to communicate and practice how to confidently communicate their projects and what they've done. And then this other aspect of hard skills, might just come through practice and trying projects out, right? Whatever it is you're designing or making, hopefully they are things that you could show in a portfolio someday, if that's helpful, depending on what stage they're in their career. So I think, yeah, it's just important to think about that mix of how do you both practice collaboration and empathy, working with a group of people? How do you practice communicating it? And then finally, what is the artifact or the output from that? What is the portfolio you might be creating? What are the visuals you might be making, or the problems you might be solving? So a mix of those things I think are important.
Cool. Yeah, like, I mean, I think that totally resonates. Like, so, even just kind of like thinking about that thread. So really getting them to work with one another, know how to communicate, know how to articulate, have that agency to feel comfortable explaining their work to others, working with others in that space. So, I mean, these seem like, pretty open-ended things. They're related to design, but, they're kind of some of these key traits that we're kind of touching upon. So let's take a look at another kind of question here. Once again, thinking about the future, right? Thinking about, I know Shay mentioned that, her role was like unfathomable years ago, right? So even taking a look at Figma, Figma being a platform that's only like 10 years old, that has introduced kind of collaboration, as Noah mentioned, into design. We're no longer looking at the sole individual designer declaring that this is a designed piece. So looking into the future, what practices, tools, or patterns should we continue to innovate on, right? So we're in this kind of decade of design, as it's been mentioned by Dylan Field, our CEO. What is this looking like in the future? And then how do you see this reflected in education? So I'm going to hand that off to Shay. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the change that I mentioned in my role from an industrial designer to a digital designer right now. And I think the thread there for me is when you say that, what might design look like in the future? I'm thinking about continuing on that thread. I think designers will always be the sense makers. We are the people who connect different groups and bring that consensus to the table. And I think whatever the future might be, curating the characteristics that Alicia and I and Noah were talking about in the previous questions would be the key. We want we want designers who are curious, who are empathetic, who understand people and can find the common ground between different disciplines and different needs, so that together we can design something. This is not about me, this is not about you, this is about us. So I think that is the part that resonates with me a lot. And to expand on the tools and practices that you're asking about here, I think this is what we lack at the same time, ironically, because we don't really have great tools or processes for equitable, accessible design. We have to design those tools at the same time when we are designing for the issue itself. And that is one of my hopes as the world is waking up, and we are seeing it right now, that we are acknowledging different groups of people, different needs, and completely opposite sides of one problem. How can we design processes so that everybody can sit around the table and have a conversation about a problem and design collaboratively together for that?
Awesome. I think that that's so true. Like just thinking about that term and the term equity in design. We were talking about empowering students. How are we making these practices, the design discipline, equitable? Determining, like who gets to design. So with that too, Noah, I would love to hear some of your thoughts on design futures, practices, tools, patterns we can continue to innovate on.
Yeah, this is a fun and hard question. I think it's historically very difficult to predict the future, even a year in advance sometimes. The rate at which our lives, technology change is so fast now that it's really hard to say. But you can definitely look at some aspects of the present to start to see what are some patterns or trends we're seeing. And one thing I would call out is that there is a world now where more people can create things than before. Even just if you're thinking about something like TikTok and the amount of creative people in the world that are exploring and communicating expressively through these tools, I feel like that's relatively new, that people could start to articulate themselves in that way and create things, more openly. And I think that that's interesting, right? It's maybe no longer just one person who dictates everything that's discussed in a room or whatever it might be, but actually like multiple people are now participating, hopefully, in the conversation, whether it's, designing aspects of your society around you or just designing a simple problem in front of you. And so I think there's definitely going to be some interesting practices there to lean into that and to see if, for example, what are the ethical responsibilities? If more people are creating, hopefully they're asking themselves too, is the thing that I'm creating needed in the world? Is it helpful? What is it sort of doing or moving forward? Whatever that might be, I think that might become a more important part of the conversation. If it's easier for anyone to create an application or a website, whatever it might be, we should then, think about where are we reinvesting the time that it used to make it was hard to learn how to code or whatever that might be. If all that's no longer relevant, where are you then investing that time? And so hopefully it is things like psychology, like ethics, things that actually help us make sure we're building meaningful products for the world. So I think there's a lot to unpack there, but those are some trends I think I'm noticing so far, and maybe there's ways where we can continue talking about it in forums like this or elsewhere to prepare ourselves for what that might look like.
Wow, that was a very, very prophetic answer. I mean, basically you're just saying look at the current landscape now, look at the tools that we have currently. I mean, if I imagine myself as a child, what it would take to take a video, and share that with others. Right now, these students are growing up and this is all around them. So it's not so much the technology anymore, but the practice. And I think for me too, thinking about Figma, and the role of the educator with Figma, it's about, how are they interacting and shepherding with the technology? Like, how are they promoting kind of good practices, good citizenship in these spaces, now that there's not these technological barriers, and that's absolutely going to influence the way that things are built and designed in the future. And speaking back to that term equity, right? A lot of these tools are more equitable, we make Figma free for individuals. And it's one of the reasons why I joined the company, because these design tools should be more equitable. More individuals should have access to them. And, it's inspiring. It's also scary, but I think that that's why the role of the educator is so much more important. All right, let's take a look at the next question. So fantastic responses. Thanks for all of this. So I'm going to pose this question to Alicia first. How does learning design practices lend to success in the modern world? So regardless of industry or career path, what do you think is most important?
Yeah, just briefly, I know we've talked about students a lot, but when I look at this question, I keep thinking how it reflects back on the educator itself. So the person that's taking this design learning approach with their students, it's going to affect them in their whole life. Teaching in a more iterative approach to the classroom. When I started learning about these different things, even in my grad school program while I was in the classroom still, I was thinking about, okay, how can I make my teaching approach more iterative, jargon that we use sometimes, like differentiated or individualized. But to your session later, maybe about prototyping, it's like how can I prototype solutions, or how can we prototype solutions? How can we learn quickly, test for feedback on even my own approach, and getting feedback from the students, just bringing them into the process. So in other words, basically the approach now is, let's co-design this classroom together. How are we going to do that, as a group? And then that spreads to the next room, the room next door, and that spreads to your teaching team or the campus. And I know that's easier said than done, but yeah, that's something that was really standing out to me when I was thinking about this question, is just, it reflects right back on the person that's trying to administer this approach, and it makes you a stronger educator.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm also going to pose this question to Shay. So what do you think about, design practice and how that translates to success in the modern world?
Yes, when you say modern world, it becomes philosophical for me. So I'm thinking about this very complex setting that we are born into, and we are making it even more complex with the tools that we're bringing into it. And again, going back to the thread of what type of human will be able to survive and be successful in this world, I think about a person who can make authentic and ethical choices at each moment when they're posed with a path. Like, I want to choose this path versus the other one. And in order to be that person, I think one of the things that has helped me are actually the practices that we use in design, like critique. Critique is something that a practice. You put things in front of others, your beliefs, things that you have created, and people give you feedback honestly if it's done well. And then you can improve your thoughts and your solutions around that. We also practice empathy through research. Like, we go to different people to understand different points of views, and that is very helpful in life in general if you want to grow and become a better person yourself. And above all, I think design principles is a great practice of setting values and who I want to be in this world, and what I want to offer the world in general. So I think that my answer is a little high level, but that is how I see that help me living in this life, no matter what my job or my position is.
Awesome. Thank you. So I love that. I'm gonna relate this also with Alicia. So thinking about researching, prototyping, setting values, there's this notion of co-creation, co-creating with the class. I think that, there's so much that is connected through kind of this entire discussion, where it's empowering students, giving them confidence, having them be part of the process, so then that way they can design that process in the future, that they have that agency, they have that ability. I think that there's a lot of opportunities for that practice in the classroom, where I think we saw from yesterday in Jess's talk, where she had students setting expectations of themselves in the classroom, setting expectations of the classroom. And I think that these are all very empowering things. So when you make them a part of it, they then have that agency, they then have that confidence. So I just want to go ahead and thank you all for joining us here today. I think that this was a super productive conversation. I really loved getting to know all of your perspectives, getting to hear a little bit more about the work that you're doing. So once again, thanks for joining our inaugural Commons, this design panel, and